for me, food has always been the place where I went back to when I wanted to feel better. Like, I'd go home and just be surrounded with my family and we'd be cooking together. And I just noticed it always made me feel better. So I started to do more of that in my own home kitchen beyond just the what's for dinner. I started to make more of our own food. I found that using my hands and creating recipes and focusing on ingredients, it not only helped me heal from a place of burnout, but it also, I noticed, was good for my family.
Welcome to Authentic Energy, a podcast dedicated to getting to the bottom of what it means to be your true, authentic self at work. I am your host, Wendy Brand. Let's take this learning journey together as I meet with guests weekly. Whether you are a leader or individual contributor, a teacher or a nurse, we'll share conversations and stories that highlight meaningful connections, self-awareness, a sense of belonging, and all the components necessary to create a workplace where you can show up in your authentic energy. Welcome back to Authentic Energy. I am Wendy Brand, your host. If you are a regular listener, I want to start by apologizing for my absence. I had such a great episode in February with my guest Janet Holliday celebrating 1 year of my podcast, and then I took an unplanned hiatus. You may or may not know this, but as of right now, my husband Steve and I produce the podcast between the two of us. When I first started the podcast last year, I was still trying to figure out my business. I had a few coaching clients, but I had a lot of extra time. But as my business has grown, it's beginning to get more difficult to prioritize the time to pull these shows together with just Steve and I. But we are committed to continuing to build the podcast, and I'm working on some really great content for 2024. So thank you for joining us today, for sticking with us. Thank you for not leaving us. We're really glad you're here. Today, I'm sharing a conversation with a guest that brings a different lens to the burnout conversation, and that's food. And just a side note, in 2023, I was really focused on improving my mindset. So I had been in the corporate world for so long and was so focused on my career. I forgot what it was really to just be aware and present. And so I learned a lot about meditation, sound healing. My coaching training taught me a lot about mindfulness. And I shared some of this in the episodes, but a lot of it was behind the scenes for me personally. In 2024, behind the scenes, I'm really focused on my physical health. Not that I haven't always been focused on it, but I'm making it a priority in 2024. And I don't just mean weight loss. I mean my overall physical health. And so it's really difficult for me. I've learned even so after leaving my corporate job, just how difficult it is for me to prioritize my health over work because I just enjoy working so much, even, in the corporate world and on my own. It doesn't matter. I enjoy working. And so in 2024, I am making it a priority for me. I'm not getting any younger and it does not get any easier. So now is the time. So while that's not going to be the focus of this Authentic Energy podcast, I just did find this conversation interesting because it's tying food with burnout, which has been a common conversation topic on the show. So before we get to the guest, I just want to bring in some facts from a study that I found from the National Library of Medicine and the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. So just to bring in some facts, we're going to talk a little theory with our guest, but I really wanted you to have just some facts that I found found on the subject. And so this was published online in December 2020, again, from the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine. We all know it was happening in 2020, our friend, the pandemic. And this article reveals that studies have demonstrated that increased fast food consumption is related to burnout, whereas self-reported healthy eating is protective. And so one study among some trauma surgeons, which, the medical industry, our medical workers were most impacted during the pandemic by this burnout for obvious reasons. It was a study of less than 1,500, around 1,500 trauma surgeons, and found that 2.6, there was a 2.6 greater odds for work-life balance was achieved when participants reported consuming a healthy diet. And so in this study, as they talk about burnout and your diet, their specific diet that they recommend is the Mediterranean diet. And the connection they're making is really to your mental health, which we know is impacted when you burn out. And they make the connection with three things: omega-3 fatty acids, amino acids, and carbohydrates, which we've all heard of those. We know what they are. Omega-3 fatty acids are found in foods like salmon, tuna, mackerel, nuts, and seeds, and plant oils. And they've been widely studied for their impact on mental health and brain function. And so these fatty acids interact with the central nervous system to support serotonin and dopamine neurotransmission and play a role in the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis to decrease the cortisone levels, indicative of inflammation and stress. And we know that chronic inflammation leads to disease, right? So, getting those omega-3 fatty acids in some of the foods that I listed can actually help us lower those cortisone levels that happen when we are in stress, fight or flight mode, and can help reduce that inflammation and stress. So the second thing was amino acids. These are found in meat, poultry, eggs, beans, legumes, and nuts. 2 amino acids implicated in brain and mental health include tryptophan. That sounds familiar, right? And I always think of turkeys and Thanksgiving, and ornithine. And so tryptophan is an important precursor to metabolites related to sleep and sleeping patterns. And then ornithine not only plays a role in improving sleep, but it also modulates stress through direct action on the central nervous system. It's the second time they've talked about the nervous system, right? We know that sleep plays a critical role in our health because it's the time that our body has to heal while we are at rest. And then the third thing is carbohydrates. And the diet provides glucose, which is the preferred fuel substrate for the brain. So simple carbohydrates consumed in the form of refined grains, sweets, and sugar-sweetened beverages can enhance brain serotonin synthesis, which triggers excessive consumption in individuals with mood disturbances. It's associated with inflammatory responses and ultimately less metabolic effects, so ability to lose weight. On the other hand, those complex carbohydrates like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, they have higher proportions of fiber or indigestible carbohydrates, and these fuel the gut bacteria to produce that short chain fatty acids that have anti-inflammatory effects on the brain. So that's just a precursor to our conversation. We already know that those are important pieces to our health, but the connection to our mental health and burnout I thought was interesting. So my guest today is Michelle Adams. Michelle is a former medical litigator and food entrepreneur who now shares her stories, recipes, and passion for intentional eating and food sustainability. She has taken her background in law and her training in the food industry to advocate for greater awareness about what we eat. And she believes that conscious choices can only be grounded in knowledge. I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right. Welcome back to Authentic Energy. I have Michelle Adams as my guest today. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, you're very welcome. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. So I've always been a foodie type person. I was raised in a small rural farming community, so it made sense because everybody there, grows their own food, and we're surrounded by food, cornfields and farms growing different produce and things like that. And I was also raised in an Italian family, and food is really important to us.
Yeah.
In an Italian, well, in a lot of families, but especially in Italian families, like we make everything, all our homemade sauces and everything. And I also happened to be raised for a good majority of the first part of my life by my grandparents. And at that time, they were basically retired and they had the time to spend on growing food and preserving food and cooking food and just teaching this to me. And that's why food has always been such a big focus of my life because of those initial life experiences. And then I went off to find my way in the world. And that happened to be going to law school, moving away to the big city. I live in Illinois, so I moved to Chicago. Everything was really, really busy. And I was working a lot of hours. I was trying to start a family. And I found myself at a point where I had gotten away from being so food focused, like being able to spend time making food the way my grandparents did, growing food, preserving food, because when you're busy trying to build a career, you have to like decide and a family at the same time, you're trying to decide what to do with your hours. You don't have a lot of extra hours. And I found myself to be, after 20 years of doing that, I found myself in a place of being really burnt out. And for me, food has always been the place where I went back to when I wanted to feel better. Like, I'd go home and just be surrounded with my family and we'd be cooking together. And I just noticed it always made me feel better. So I started to do more of that in my own home kitchen beyond just the what's for dinner. I started to make more of our own food. And I got into baking, which I had never been much of a baker before. We liked to bake in my family, but it was all about the cooking. And so I just found a perfect fit for me with baking because I found that using my hands and creating recipes and focusing on ingredients, it not only helped me heal from a place of burnout, but it also, I noticed, was good for my family.
Mm.
And when I started to do that, I started to find other things I was passionate about, and that just led me on a different path for my career and for my life.
Wonderful. And so where is that now?
Well, it's been a journey. I mean, I have found it's not a straight path, when you're trying to find
Yeah.
your way. And so I started to when I started to bake a lot, I realized that I really love that whole bake from scratch philosophy. And we didn't have anything like that in the town where I was living at the time. We had moved from Chicago to the suburbs. And so I decided, along with my sister, who had been in the restaurant industry, we decided to open up a bakery. And we
Okay.
did. Like in our hometown, we opened up a farm to table style bakery. Everything was made from scratch. And it was extremely popular. It became a very beloved fixture in the community because at that time there wasn't a lot of awareness for this whole bake from scratch. Now I've seen it explode over the last 15 years or so, but that's like I was at the beginning of that where it was like starting to become a thing.
Yeah.
And that led me to another journey, which was a whole I've always been interested in health as well. I was a medical litigator as an attorney. And I started to realize that what we're eating is just as important when you're making food from scratch, is just as important to not just the food itself and how good it tastes and the flavor and everything, but it's also just as important to our health. And I started to make that intersection because I had some illnesses in my family. My son had stomach problems for a really long time. We couldn't find answers through traditional medical ways. And so I started because I've always been a person who likes to research, I like to discover information. I like health things and I understand medicine. So I wanted to find out on my own, well, how can I help him? Because, he's not getting help through traditional means. And that's when I focused on the food. And when
Mm.
I focused on the food, everything changed. Like my son's health improved. My daughter has an autoimmune condition that it definitely helped that. I had long COVID and I ended up with all these health conditions that I didn't want to take medicine, but the doctors were saying you need to take medicine for, probably for the rest of your life. And I said, there has to be a different way. And when I always turn to food and focus on the food, that's when it always helped all of us, including myself. And now what I do is I run a podcast. It's called Harvesting the Truth. And I talk about where our food comes from, how our food, how using food to heal can change your life. Just focusing on food and what's in it, especially ingredients, because I've learned a lot over the last few years about what's in our food, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so I really, I want to do what my grandfather always told me, which was you need to get back to basics. And that basics with our food is getting away from all of the ultra processed food. And I also have a blog where I write. It's called foodstoke.com. And that's what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And I have had a similar path where really just my mom raised us. She was a single mom with 3 kids, and she would make homemade yogurt for us. She would juice. She would juice carrots in the winter. She did that in the early years. And then as she was trying to raise 3 kids on her own, work became more and more important, and we had less and less of that. So as the oldest daughter, I remember a lot of that. My sisters not so much, but it really set a foundation for me, always kind of pointing back to food as something that can help or hinder. And so my adult life has really been searching for what foods impact me. And I did the Whole 30 like in 2016 or 2017. And I really started to understand and feel in my body like, okay, when I eat dairy, it feels this way. When I have a lot of sugar or sodas or, it affects my body this way. And so I appreciate what you're saying and what your focus now is. And what's interesting to me and the lens I haven't put on it before is that burnout lens. So talk to me a little bit about how the food can help us to not burn out. Like, how can we use food if we're on the brink of burnout?
Sure. So there's two things in there. The first is the food itself. Because right now, with if you're eating a standard American diet, you're eating the way that basically everyone in America eats, because you're eating a lot of processed food that's filled with too much sugar, salt, fat, not enough nutrients. It's not really going to help you thrive. And to be at your best, optimal in your body, to prevent, you know, to either heal from burnout or prevent burnout, you want to be in the place where your body is well nourished. And in order to do that, you really do have to know what you're eating and what you're putting into your body and what it's going to do to you. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not saying never to eat chips. I don't buy them currently, but, when you go out to dinner or lunch, sometimes, you're going to have chips on your plate. Or if you're on a road trip and you're in the middle of nowhere, you stop at a convenience mart, you might pick up a bag of chips, right? There's times and reasons to have food like that. That's not really food that nourishes you. It's not food that's going to, when you put into your body, it's going to, help you. um if you eat too much of it's going to hurt you, but also the things in the food is what you should be thinking about, and that's why that type of food is just a treat. That's all it is. I mean, it tastes really good for a reason. They want you to keep buying it. That's why they make it like that. They coat it with a lot of salt. They fry it in seed oils. And I use the word treat loosely, because treat should be something also healthy, right? It should be something made from scratch in your own kitchen. You know what's in it. That's why I love baking from scratch. But, that's how we think about things. And so if you're on the road and you grab a bag of chips, that's your treat. You're not doing it every single day. You're just doing it once in a great while. You're going to treat yourself to a bag of chips. Nothing bad is going to happen to you if you just eat that one bag of chips. But if you eat it every day consistently, which a lot of people who are working in their careers, they're eating convenience food, because
Mhm.
I know I did. I was working a lot of hours trying to build my career as a lawyer, and there was really no time to think about what's in my food, what am I eating? Until later on, when I started to realize and I started to bake a lot, I started to realize, hey, this is what's in the food. But at first, like, I'm just grabbing something fast. I remember being on trial with this other lawyer, and we didn't have time for lunch. And she reached into her bag, her briefcase, and she pulls out a whole bag of these chocolate candies. And it happened to be at Valentine's, where we're on this trial. And she pulled out a whole bag of these chocolate heart candies. And she's like, oh, here's our lunch. And that's the type of thing that happens when you're building your career. You might be eating a bag of candy for lunch. But I think it's important in today's world where the food is just getting, made so much more poorly with so many bad ingredients. And we're starting to realize what it's doing to our health, that I think it's important to realize maybe I shouldn't eat that chocolate candy. Maybe I should put into my briefcase something more healthy, like maybe a banana or an apple, or like I used to love to bring like yogurt parfaits. When I started to realize, what's in our food, I'm like, I'll bring my own yogurt parfait. I can bring my own salad. I can bring a bunch of different things. I don't really need to opt for the bad stuff.
Yeah.
So there is that when you want to prevent burnout or heal from burnout, you really do become more aware about what you're eating and what it's going to do to you, because it is going to play a part in the burnout. You need to get your body in optimum health. The second thing is what happens to your body when you are burnt out and you start to make more of your own food. What happens is that you're using your hands to cook your meals or to bake, and you're creating something. And those actions are what researchers have found to help you heal from burnout, because the using of your hands, either when you're cooking or doing another activity, if you're burnt out, like playing an instrument, or maybe like taking up tennis, or something where you're using your hands, like painting, anything like that creates a dopamine effect, and it helps you to naturally become more happy instead of like relying on medications. And then the other thing is that the more that you create something like artwork or music or food, the more you're creating these new neural pathways in your brain, which help you beat burnout. And, I'm not an expert in this, but I've been through it myself. And I know that for me, when I was burnt out, that it definitely helped me overcome my burnout to do those things, both keep my body well nourished with good food, to create, and to use my hands, because as lawyers, we don't often do any of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I all of those things are so important. And as I was listening, I was just reflecting on my own burnout journey. And part of it is unique and related to food. But what I'll say first is that when really what kind of woke me up to my burnout was being diagnosed with two autoimmunes. And what the doctor said to me, and it was a holistic functional medicine doctor, not a regular general practitioner, but she said, Wendy, she ran all these blood panels and she said, there is a lot of inflammation in your body. Your cortisol levels are very high. And so what I realized was that the stress that I was putting on my body, not just from the work that I was doing and the amount of pressure that I was under from the role that I was playing in this organization, but it was also my food causing inflammation in my body. So it was like a double
Yeah.
whammy, right? The stress and the food. And I'll share that this last place where I worked, where I burned out, was a very popular fast food restaurant that is popular in the Southern United States. And we were required as leaders in that organization, we couldn't bring in, the only food we could bring in was food from that restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So if we brought, even if we brought in a salad, it had to be their salad. And so the options were very limited. And so my eating habits became worse during the 4 years that I was there. And my role also in the last 2 years in that organization was really going out and visiting the restaurants. And that meant eating in those restaurants on a daily basis. And so I have to say, when I left that work, I really did think that I would immediately just shed all this weight, right? Because I was no longer under the pressure of that role, and I stopped eating fast food altogether. I can't even go through a drive-through anymore. It just repulses me. But it didn't. It hasn't happened overnight, and and as you age, your hormones look different. And so I think there's a lot of different factors at play. And I've been my husband is teaching me to play guitar, just doing more of that creativity and adding more dopamine into my system, lowering those cortisol levels. That I have been back to the doctor. The cortisol levels are a lot lower. The inflammation is going down. It's not happening overnight, because I spent quite a bit of time, decades really, under stress in my career. It's fascinating to me, just the role that food can play, and I'm excited to experience in my own life just the positive impacts that it's now having.
Yeah, it's not an overnight journey. I think that's what, some people think is, oh, I'll give up fast food and I'll
Yeah.
suddenly, lose weight or feel better. But, it's definitely a process. And it's not just the fast food, like that fast food is the same food that you buy in the middle aisles of the grocery store, the freezer section and all of the prepackaged food. At least being the owner of a food business, what it taught me was I would go to all these different food shows. And at these food shows, they're showing their food. They want restaurant owners to buy that food, and serve it in their restaurant. And a lot of this food is just prepackaged stuff. I mean, it's the same thing as what you get in the grocery store, just on a grander level. And all of that food, the pre-processed industrialized food, it has a lot of seed oils in there. It has ingredients. There's over 10,000 chemical additives that we have in our country right now. And so, when you look at the back of a label and it has seed oils and high fructose corn syrup and modified starches and all these types of words you can't pronounce or you don't know what they are, that's an industrialized food. That's the same food that you're going to find in the grocery store and the fast food restaurants. And it's so unfortunate because all of that is causing us a lot of inflammation in our body, problems with our gut microbiome. It's really harming everybody, not just us, not just adults, but kids too.
Mhm.
It's linked to all kinds of diseases, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disorders, ADHD. There's all research that people can look at.
Mhm.
Once we take control of our health and we cut out those foods, we start to realize this because of the changes that our own body goes through. But as a woman, I understand, like especially when you go through menopause, it's that weight is not easy to take
Yeah.
off, and it just takes time, because you have to add in, now that we've like gotten our bodies optimal with our food, we have to add in that whole fitness thing and try to work through that and get our hormones regulated and stuff. And so that can be a little bit difficult, but it definitely is a process and not just an overnight journey.
Yeah. Um, And so, if there were, I think you've really spelled out for our listeners what they can do. If there was just one thing that you would encourage, um, our listeners to do differently if they could to start to see or make an impact in their nutrition, especially if they're nearing burnout or post burnout? What would that be?
Um, Start making your own food. I think that you can start there even before you start anywhere else. I know it's important to read labels and to know what's in your food, but if you start to make your own food, it's it's going to be healthier than anything you can buy. Even if your starting means you go to the store and you might buy something processed, from the frozen section. It doesn't matter. That's a start.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a start that gets you to start cooking and getting used to cooking. And even if it's a box cake mix, I now know that those box mixes are the biggest scam because they're just pantry staples. You have flour, sugar, salt, and leavener in your own kitchen. You don't need a box mix, but some people need that comfort level to start. And
Yeah.
it's a great place to start is to buy a box mix. So you buy a box mix and make a homemade cake instead of buying grocery store cake. Because that grocery store cake is going to have a lot of additives and things in it that aren't good for you, and especially the food color. I mean, some of that food color, it's made from coal tar. It's very toxic. So, just start with buying something that you're comfortable with that gets you into the kitchen as a start. And then when you get comfortable cooking on your own or just cooking in general, then you can move up and start to cook more from scratch, more with whole foods, start to visit your farmer's market, make connections with farmers, just start small steps and get comfortable with making your own food. Because at the end of the day, that's the answer. You have to make your own food. You have to. I mean, I know a lot of people tell me, I don't like to cook. What do I do? You can cook very simply. You can make a salad. It doesn't involve cooking.
Yeah.
You're just putting ingredients together. You're putting lettuce and, tomatoes in a bowl and, it's a salad. You don't have to really cook if you're not comfortable with cooking, but you do unfortunately have to cook if you want to be healthy because the food that's out there that's prepared convenience items, that's not healthy.
Such great advice. Michelle, this has been a great conversation. Where can people find you? You mentioned a podcast.
So my podcast is called Harvesting the Truth, and it's all about food and health and what's in our food. And so it's real stories from real people about the food that we eat. And then you can also find me on my website, which is foodstoic.com. And I have a newsletter that I send out on Mondays, which is 5 things about food. So, there's a recipe in there, there's what to eat, what not to eat, and just some thoughts about food that I have. And you can also find me on social media, Instagram at Food Stoic, The Food Stoic, and then Facebook Food Stoic.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. This was so fun.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy. And I really appreciate you getting the word out about this because it's so important.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did like it, please leave a review or follow the show so you can catch us each week. And please share this episode with someone that you think may enjoy it. Have a great week.